General Hospital will reveal 3 big shockers you must watch this week, June 2nd to 6th. Rick plays dirty in court, Micheal falls, Nina and Drew's affair is exposed. And Brooke Lynn makes a tough decision. Rick no longer entered the courtroom as just another attorney doing his job. He walked in like a predator circling its prey. Emboldened by the silent permission granted to him by Willow and Drew, 2 people who had once stood on the opposite side of morality but now found themselves willing to compromise everything for the illusion of justice. They had given him the unspoken go-ahead to remove the gloves, to wage war not with facts but with destruction, and to shatter what remained of Micheal's reputation as a father in the cold, judgmental eyes of the court. Rick, never one to shy away from using technicalities and emotional manipulation, saw the entire proceeding not as a battle of law but as a stage for calculated ruin. His every motion, every line of questioning, was designed to humiliate and dismantle, to expose Micheal's flaws not only as a parent but as a man. Making sure that every word uttered dripped with moral condemnation, no matter how manufactured or misleading. While Rick sharpened his arsenal of legal weapons, another storm brewed on the witness stand. Sasha arrived in court, composed on the outside but fighting a rising tide of anxiety that threatened to choke her with every breath. She had been called to testify, ostensibly as a neutral party, but the truth that weighed heavy on her heart rendered that neutrality impossible. Deep within her, the undeniable fact that Micheal was the father of the child she carried turned her presence into a ticking time bomb. With every question directed at her, every glance from the opposing counsel, the potential for disaster grew. One misstep, one slip of the tongue, and the entire courtroom would descend into chaos. The burden of that secret was like a vice tightening around her chest. And although she had sworn to protect that truth, for now, the pressure to hold firm was becoming unbearable. Elsewhere in the courtroom, Diane sat with an expression of steel. Her years of experience had prepared her for battles like this, but even she knew that this trial was unlike any other. The stakes were not merely legal, they were familial, emotional, existential. She wasn't just defending a client, she was protecting the delicate fabric of a family already strained by loss, betrayal, and secrets. Diane had prepared for every possible line of attack. But she also understood that this courtroom had become a minefield. Even the most well-crafted argument could be undone by an unforeseen revelation, a surprise witness, or a sudden betrayal. She moved with deliberate control, every word chosen with surgical precision, but even she could feel that she was walking a tightrope with no safety net. And then there was Nina, always the wild card. Present in the courtroom not as a direct participant but as someone whose mere silence was both an asset and a threat. She had made it this far by carefully curating the image she wanted the world to see, remorseful, misunderstood, and desperate to protect the fragile relationships she had left. But beneath that carefully painted veneer lay a woman with too many secrets, secrets that, if revealed, could obliterate not just her chances of redemption but her entire identity. Her affair with Drew, concealed beneath layers of deception, was one such secret. Even more dangerous was her role in manipulating or hiding the true results of critical DNA tests. The kind that could determine paternity and therefore the outcome of the custody battle. If she misspoke, if she let even a fraction of the truth slip, she wouldn't just hurt Micheal, she would destroy herself, alienate Willow forever, and lose any hope of having a place in her grandchild's life. Meanwhile, outside the confines of the legal arguments and hidden agendas, Sunny and Carly sat side by side, their usual fire replaced by a tense and suffocating silence. For Sunny, a man who had built his life on power, loyalty, and family, the idea that Micheal could be permanently torn away from his children and reputation was unbearable. His fists clenched beneath the table. Jaw set, eyes locked on every word exchanged in the courtroom, silently daring anyone to hurt his son further. Carly, on the other hand, bore a different kind of pain, the guilt of having watched things fall apart, the fear of losing Wiley and Amelia, and the simmering rage toward Nina, who had played her cards so strategically that the truth now threatened to collapse everything Carly had built. What unfolded in that courtroom was more than a trial, it was a war. A war fought not just with evidence but with secrets, buried truths, emotional manipulation, and silent threats. Every person in that room, whether they sat behind the bench, at the table, or in the gallery, carried with them a shadow of guilt or knowledge of something they were desperate to keep hidden. The judge's gavel had become a symbol not of justice but of finality. And everyone knew that when it came down, someone's life would be irrevocably changed. In the world of Port Charles, justice was never simple. It was layered with alliances, betrayals, and the ever-present danger of exposure. Rick was playing to win, and he had no intention of stopping until Micheal was stripped of everything: his children, his dignity, his place in the world. Sasha was fighting an internal war between loyalty and truth, one that threatened to destroy her either way. Diane was navigating a battlefield where the rules changed by the minute. And Nina hovered like a match above dry kindling, knowing that one false move could ignite a fire that none of them could control. And amid it all, Sonny and Carly waited, not just for a verdict, but for fate to show its hand. Because in a place where truth was as fragile as glass and silence more dangerous than a lie, the only certainty was that when judgment came, no one would leave the courtroom untouched. Brooke Lynn found herself spiraling into a sea of regret and heartbreak that no amount of denial could suppress. The moment Gio turned to her and, with cold finality, told her to get out of his life, it was as if years of buried guilt and longing erupted to the surface in one cruel, devastating instant. She had always known that the day might come when her son would learn the truth, that she had given him up, made choices on his behalf that he never consented to, and that those decisions had shaped the pain he now carried within. But knowing it in theory and experiencing it in reality were two very different things. Joe's words cut her deeper than she anticipated, not because they were unexpected, but because they confirmed the worst fear she had held close to her chest, that in trying to protect him, she had lost him. Still, Brooke Lynn was not the kind of woman to crumble and stay down. Beneath her vulnerability burned a fierce maternal instinct that had only grown stronger with time. Even as tears blurred her vision and sorrow constricted her chest, she made a vow, one that echoed through her very soul. She would win her son back. She would find a way, no matter how difficult, to reach him, to make him understand why she had made the choices she did. It wasn't about justifying her past or begging for forgiveness, it was about love, unconditional and unwavering. The kind of love that endures rejection, withstands hatred, and persists through years of separation and silence. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Gio had been hurt too deeply. His heart barricaded behind walls built from years of abandonment and confusion. But Brooke Lynn was ready to fight, not just for reconciliation, but for the truth that had long been buried under fear and shame. As she faced her internal storm, there was one person who observed the chaos from a quiet distance: Tracy. The matriarch of the Quartermain family had seen more heartbreaks, betrayals, and reconciliations than most people could ever imagine. She was not one to meddle without purpose. But in this particular situation, she sensed an opportunity, a delicate, fleeting moment in which her influence might help bridge the chasm that had formed between her granddaughter and great-grandson. Tracy had always possessed a quiet understanding of people's hearts, and despite her often blunt demeanor, she had a gift for seeing through the noise and focusing on what truly mattered. She wasn't someone Gio resented. In fact, among all the chaos in his life, Tracy had remained something of a constant, a familiar, if sharp-tongued figure who never pretended to be perfect but never turned her back on family either. Tracy knew that approaching Gio wouldn't be simple. The boy was angry, confused, and deeply wounded. But she also understood that he wasn't lost. Not yet. Somewhere beneath that anger was a young man desperately searching for identity, for belonging, for clarity in a life that had been riddled with unanswered questions. She believed that if anyone could reach through that haze, it might be her, not by force, but by offering him something that had long been denied to him: honesty. No theatrics, no pity, just the truth. Tracy had never been one to sugarcoat reality. And perhaps that was exactly what Gio needed, a voice that didn't try to fix him but simply acknowledged his pain. But the path to healing wasn't just obstructed by Brooklyn's mistakes or Joe's mistrust. There was another fracture in the family dynamic that threatened to deepen the divide, one rooted in the strained relationship between Gio and Dante. Ever since the incident with Rocco's alcohol poisoning, Dante had viewed Gio through a lens of suspicion and anger. He saw Gio as reckless, a threat to his son. And perhaps even a symbol of all the chaos that had seeped into their lives. The image of Rocco unconscious, pale and unresponsive, haunted Dante to this day, and in his mind. Gio had become the embodiment of that trauma. It didn't matter that the full story hadn't yet been told, or that Gio may have been just as much a victim of circumstance. What mattered was that Dante had watched his child nearly die, and someone had to carry the blame. But time, as it often does, had begun to shift the narrative. Details had emerged. Perspectives had changed, and Dante was beginning to see that perhaps he had been too quick to judge. The more he watched Gio, watched the pain in his eyes, the way he distanced himself from others. The walls he built around his emotions, the more Dante began to understand that this wasn't a boy acting out of malice. This was a young man drowning in unresolved questions, longing for connection. And lashing out not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much and didn't know how to express it. Dante, for all his training and experience as a cop, had failed to see the human beneath the anger. But now, as he reflected on the past, he found himself questioning whether it was time to stop being a disciplinarian and start being a father figure. It was a fragile, delicate turning point for everyone involved. Brooklyn stood at the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into the unknown if it meant even the slightest chance of earning her son's forgiveness. Tracy stood as a pillar of wisdom, ready to guide but not dictate, hoping to steer the family back from the brink without pushing too hard. And Dante lingered somewhere in between, still struggling to reconcile his emotions but slowly realizing that anger would not heal the wounds tearing his family apart. The Quartermaines, a family known for their grandeur and dysfunction in equal measure, now faced a reckoning that no amount of wealth or influence could solve. But there was hope. Beneath all the pain and broken trust, love still existed, buried, bruised, and fragile, but still beating. And if Brooklyn could hold on to that, if Tracy could nurture it, and if Dante could embrace it, then perhaps Gio would one day open his heart again. Not out of obligation or pressure, but because he would finally understand that he had never truly been alone. That even in their mistakes, the people who loved him had always been there, waiting, forgiveness in their eyes, redemption in their hearts. All it would take was one step back, one act of grace, and the healing could begin. Nina's relationship with Drew had begun as an unexpected alliance, an intersection of two wounded souls seeking solace and validation amidst the wreckage of their personal lives. It wasn't love at first sight, nor was it a calculated strategy, at least not in the beginning. Instead, it unfolded quietly in the shadows of shared frustrations, whispered regrets, and mutual disappointments in the people they once trusted. For Nina, Drew represented a kind of strength she admired, a man who had survived trauma and emerged with a guarded heart, much like her own. For Drew, Nina was a paradox, fiery and manipulative on the surface, yet deeply fractured beneath. Together, they found themselves drawn into something complicated, something reckless. But as the affair developed, it became clear that this was no mere dalliance. There was weight to what they were doing. And the consequences were slowly beginning to eclipse the pleasure. Nina, for all her rationalizations, knew that what she had with Drew was born not just of desire, but of escape, from the guilt that haunted her after sabotaging Willow's life, from the shame of being ostracized by Carly, and from the loneliness that had slowly devoured her. Drew, on the other hand, was still reeling from betrayals of his own, and while he told himself that Nina was just a temporary distraction, the emotional entanglement between them was growing too complex to deny. Yet neither one was prepared for how deeply their actions would ripple outward. The danger of their relationship wasn't just in who might discover it, it was in the damage it could cause to the very fabric of families already hanging by a thread. Nina's involvement with Drew was a betrayal layered atop other betrayals, her secrecy during the custody trial, her manipulation of truth, her silence in court. And now, as legal battles raged over Wiley and Amelia, her connection to Drew threatened to unravel any remaining credibility she had in Willow's eyes. Drew, meanwhile, was torn between loyalty to those he once loved and his growing attachment to a woman whose motives were always tangled in self-preservation. What began as a moment of weakness had evolved into something dangerous, because neither one could fully let go. As this quiet chaos churned beneath the surface, another couple was facing their own reckoning. Curtis and Portia found themselves standing on the edge of yet another truth revealed, another lie uncovered. The marriage they had fought so hard to build was showing signs of erosion again, this time due to Portia's latest deception. Curtis, still navigating the trauma of his paralysis and all the personal shifts it brought, now had to reevaluate whether trust was something their relationship could still be built upon. Portia, torn between good intentions and a history of half-truths, pleaded for forgiveness, but the damage was undeniable. Fans were left wondering. Should they keep fighting for something that always seems on the verge of collapse, or walk away before the resentment becomes irreversible? Elsewhere, chaos brewed in another corner of Port Charles. Christina, with her righteous fury and impulsive spirit, had reached her breaking point. The revelation that Rick and Ava had been blackmailing her mother, Alexis, ignited a firestorm inside her, one that she had no intention of containing. Despite Alexis's pleas for civility, despite Lucky Spencer's attempts to reason with her, Christina was barreling toward confrontation. Logic had never been her strong suit when it came to protecting her family. She operated on emotion, raw and explosive, and this time was no different. The pattern was all too familiar: hear a truth, explode in anger, confront the enemy, make everything worse. Rinse, wash, repeat. Alexis, exhausted from years of trying to guide her daughter down a more controlled path, feared the inevitable. Christina's passion, though admirable, had once again blinded her to the complexities of the situation. Rick and Ava were dangerous, intellectually ruthless and emotionally calculating. Charging at them head-on was not only foolish, it was suicidal. But Christina didn't want to listen. She wanted justice, revenge, retribution, anything but silence. And so, the cycle threatened to continue. The adults begged for patience. Christina demanded action. And through it all, Port Charles simmered. Hidden affairs, marital fractures, political manipulations, and family betrayals rippled through its core, ensuring that no relationship was safe, no secret truly buried. Nina and Drew's tangled emotions threatened to ignite a public scandal. Curtis and Portia stood at a crossroads, forced to decide if love could survive a second storm. And Christina, with fire in her veins and chaos in her wake, prepared to step into yet another battle, one that could either shatter her enemies or destroy herself in the process. In this world, healing rarely came quietly. It came after explosions, after tears, after confrontations that laid bare the ugliest truths. And as summer approached in Port Charles, one thing was certain. The heat wasn't only in the weather, it was in the hearts of those who had everything to lose.